Still coming in. Good evening, everyone. I'm Maura Spiegel, and I'll be your host this evening at Narrative Medicine Rounds. On behalf of the Division of Narrative Medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, I welcome those of you who are joining Rounds for the first time, and welcome back all returning attendees. Narrative medicine arose at Columbia in 2001 and is now an international movement at the intersection of humanities, the arts, clinical practice, and healthcare justice. Training in narrative medicine helps those interested in person-centered, respectful healthcare to deepen their self-awareness, clinical attunement, collaborative skills, and creative capacities. The narrative medicine community assembles monthly at Rounds to grow our knowledge, partnership, and commitment to a just and effective healthcare future. Before we introduce our wonderful speaker for tonight, I've been asked to mention a few basic Zoom ground rules to ensure the program goes smoothly. Please keep your microphone muted to cut down on background noise during the program. And if there's any disruptions or inappropriate comments or something like that, they'll be removed. During the talk, we ask people to keep chat interactions to a minimum. As we get closer to the Q&A part of the event, we will invite you to submit questions via chat for our speaker, but before then, we won't be monitoring questions, so please save your questions to type into the chat after we make the announcement. The event is being recorded. Everyone who registered will receive the link to it a few days following the event, and you can share it as you wish. Captioning will be available during tonight's event. At the end, we'll have a link to the online bookstores to order books or find more information about our speaker and about the Department of Medical Humanities and Ethics and the program in narrative medicine. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Sarika Talve-Goodman. Sarika was a graduate of our very first class of master's students in narrative medicine here at Columbia. She went on to receive a PhD in literature from the University of California, San Diego, specializing in modernism studies, disability studies, trauma theory, Jewish cultural studies, and critical theories of race, gender, and sexuality. She went on to teach at Oberlin College. When her sister Adina became ill, she left Oberlin and paused her academic career to be with her family. More recently, she earned a degree as a licensed clinical social worker and is currently working as an integrative trauma therapist and writing a book of experimental fiction. A few quick words from me about the extraordinary posthumous collection of essays, Your Hearts, Your Scars, Sarika will read from tonight, written by her sister, Adina Talve-Goodman, and edited by Sarika and Hannah Tinti. Of the collection, Danielle Ofri wrote, quote, "The energy coursing through her, Adina's prose is positively contagious. And I agree there is a life force in these pages, an intensity of sentience and clarity, a voice that is exuberant, surprising, and penetrating, intimate, warm, and also hot with writerly ingenuity, telling of a life, a relationship to family, and to life itself, so compelling and rare. Reading these pages made me think of these lines from the poet Max Ritvo. My body lights up for life, like all the wishes being granted in a fountain at the same instant." As a reviewer, Chris Kleindienst wrote, "This book will find you in your most tender place and open you to your own precious life." Welcome, Sarika. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maura. Thank you to the program, Narrative Medicine program, for having me to share my sister Adina's book here at Rounds. For me, this feels like the most correct place to be in conversation about your hearts, your scars. And one reason is personal, like Maura said, the delight of being with mentors and friends who are dear to me, who gave me an intellectual and creative home almost more than a decade ago. And narrative medicine continues to nourish me as it did my sister, whose writing I'll be sharing with you tonight. So I'm deeply honored and grateful to be here. Just a little bit of context about our relationship to narrative medicine, and then about the book, and then I'll read from some excerpts. A quick story about how I became involved is I was a young student, struggling with what the direction of my path would be, whether I'd go in the direction of literature or medicine. And I went to meet Rita Sharon in her office uptown at Columbia Presbyterian to discuss an internship, and remember exploding with story. I remember telling her about my life as the sister of 2 siblings with chronic illness. I remember talking about Adina's congenital heart disease and heart transplant at 19, how her living between illness and wellness shaped me in every way. I remember feeling like I was becoming more known to myself through this encounter and through my introduction to this work. And at the time, so when I told Adina about this, I wasn't aware that she had already found narrative medicine and was excited about the work also, which to me was confirmation. That made sense, that this was my direction. This was the medicine I needed, the medicine we needed, the medicine the world needed, that this interdisciplinary work offered new pathways to explore what we were living and the kind of ethics and politics of care that we wanted to embody. So a little bit of context about the book. When Adina became unexpectedly ill with PTLD, an aggressive form of post-transplant lymphoma, and passed away 6 months later at 31 years old, she had just finished her first year of the creative nonfiction MFA at the University of Iowa. She was working slowly and meticulously on a book of essays about chronic illness and her transplant. I was her reader, and I worked on most pieces with her as she wrote them. I knew what her vision of this book was, or what she was writing towards. It was a book blending creative nonfiction, ethics, and critical theory. When she got sick, we didn't have time to talk about what she wanted to do with her unfinished work. And when she died, I went into the darkness of deep grief, and I felt all I could do was try to find ways to be closer to her. So shaping her unfinished work into a manuscript was something I knew I could help do for her, something I knew she had wanted. She had so wanted to publish a book. So I gathered together pieces that were in various stages and modes of her creative process, from polished essays to assignments that she'd written for Iowa, to a few essays that were still in wild draft form in multiple versions, to fragments that I gathered from her notebooks. And I approached Hannah Tinti, who founded and edits the literary magazine One Story in Brooklyn, where Adina worked for a decade, to see if we could make this a publishable book. Your Scars would not be here without Hannah Tinti and the One Story team, who knew and loved Adina. I'm profoundly grateful to Hannah for her skill as an editor in shaping this manuscript with me, especially her masterful work of crafting the essays that were in draft form into beautiful single pieces and using only Adina's words throughout the book. I also want to thank Adina's dear friend Joe Firestone and my parents for also being part of this collaborative effort with us. This is not the book Adina was writing or would have written, and there should be and would have been many, many more books, but it is all her voice, and I think captures in some way the vision of what she was creating. As I wrote in the introduction, it's a book made of love and grief by Adina and by us. So I'll read excerpts from 3 pieces. The first is I Must Have Been That Man, which was first published in the Bellevue in 2015. The title references James Tate's poem, I Must Have Been That Man, that Adina uses in the epigraph of the essay. I must have been that man. On a Monday night in October, when I was 20, I walked home with a boy from a party, drinking cheap whiskey and sharing puffs of his cigarette. We stopped on the stairs outside of my apartment and kissed. I asked if he wanted to spend the night. This is healthy, I told myself. This is college. In my room, we laughed and shushed each other, fumbling around with buttons and zippers until he took off my shirt. "What's this?" he said as he traced the scar down the middle of my chest, his fingers lingering on the keloids, the small hardened lumps of scar tissue that punctuated the already prominent pink line. "I had a heart transplant," I said. "When?" "A year ago." "Oh." I waited for him to ask the usual questions. "Why did you need it? Are you okay now? What about the donor?" "You have great boobs," he said. After he fell asleep, I got out of bed and felt around in the dark for a shirt. I could only find his flannel, so I put it on like a robe and walked to the bathroom. I opened his shirt in front of the mirror and placed my fingers on each of the keloids, imagining I might be able to play my breastplate like an accordion, find the right note, and have the scar disappear. Even after a year, the straight scar down my chest hadn't become a part of my landscape like the rest. The 2 scars on my back that frame my shoulders like wings, the scars on each rib that tan in the summer and look like scrapes in bark, and all the small ovals where suction tubes once were that could easily be birthmarks or sunspots. But the transplant scar remained surgical looking and wouldn't blend or sink. It sat there hanging just below my neck. To the left of the scar, I could see the new heart beating beneath my skin. Some nights shortly after surgery, it beat so hard I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake listening to its unfamiliar rhythm, bump, 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 bump. The new double pump song of perfection, replacing the one wrong beat, a single ventricle I had had before. Sometimes I'd fall asleep and dream of people dancing in ballets with symphonies coming out of their mouths when I expected words. I didn't tell anyone about the dreams. I was afraid they'd say that maybe it was the donor, maybe the donor had danced. I tried not to think about the donor much. I'd spent close to 2 years waiting, always wondering what the donor might mean, might change in me. I'd seen kids lose themselves in their donors. They'd make websites dedicated to living the life their donor never got to finish. They'd talk about their donor as if they were friends. When I listed, my parents, both rabbis, told me a story from the Talmud about a rabbi who goes to visit 3 sick men. And each time the rabbi asks, "Is your suffering dear to you?" That's the whole story, they'd explain. And it's the question that's important. I took it to mean this: when the time comes, will you be able to live without the heart defect that always made you special and strong? Will you be able to face wellness and normalcy? Will getting a good grade be as big of an accomplishment if you didn't have to study in the hospital to get it? So when the call came, I didn't ask where the heart was coming from or where it had been. And when I started to dream in ballets, I didn't go looking for answers in my donor. Instead, I decided this must be how people with healthy hearts dream, in music and dancing, kicking off blankets and sheets in the middle of winter because my blood had never moved so fast through my veins, and the warmth of it was almost unbearable. After the surgery, the doctors said that it would take a full year, for the heart to thaw and reach its capacity. Now, at almost a year, I stood in front of the mirror in a boy's shirt, wondering how long it was going to take until that new rhythm wouldn't keep me up at night. How long would I have to live with this new heart before it would feel like mine, and I would forget the years I'd spent waiting, getting too close to death? How many cigarettes I would have to smoke? How many boys I would have to take home to prove to myself and the new heart that this body was still my house? Is your suffering dear to you? No, I thought. In the morning, I hid his cigarettes and made him toast, and everything was funny again. We had headaches, and it was Tuesday. After he left, I showered, got dressed, gathered my books, and stepped outside. It was October in St. Louis and not quite cold. The walk to campus wasn't long, 15 minutes, and even though I had a car, I walked it almost every day. I liked to walk it alone. Before the transplant, 15 minutes was impossible. The doctors explained it to me like this: for you, in heart failure, a 15-minute walk is like a marathon. And that's why sometimes you throw up at the end. Doctors often explained my illness to me using sports metaphors, as if as a kid born with a single ventricle heart, sports was a language I ever learned to speak. I sat on my stoop and rubbed my head, regretting my decision to forego a Tylenol. The boy from the night before was probably smoking a cigarette outside the library, not knowing the gift he had given me by not asking questions and treating my body like I hadn't been split down the middle and pieced back together. But now he knew that I walked around that campus with a perpetually broken chest plate and a very loud heart. And for that reason, I didn't want to see him again. I walked toward a coffee shop. I kept to the side streets and little alleys because I felt as if I might cry, and if I did, I didn't want to run into anyone who might try to talk to me about it. Halfway down the street, I saw a man lying on the ground, his electric wheelchair fallen beside him in the dirt. As I got closer, I recognized him. He rode around the loop a lot, and I remembered talking to him a few times when I would sit outside at the coffee shop. He always asked what I was reading, but he never seemed to remember that we'd met before. Earlier that spring, he stopped by my table on a sunny day and said, "You're just lovely." I thanked him, and I meant it, because on some days after the surgery, I would look down at my chest to make sure it wasn't bleeding, to make sure you couldn't see that underneath my shirt, I had been stapled together and might one day do something clumsy, slip on the sidewalk and come undone. I was put together fine, expertly, in fact, but something remained unhealed in me that spring, and it comforted me to know the world hadn't noticed. When I was close enough to speak to him, he propped himself on his elbow and adjusted his glasses. "Well, hello," he said. "Hi," I said. "Walking in the rain, huh?" I said, "I'm on my way to the coffee shop." "Oh, that's nice," he said, as he tried to pull himself into a sitting position. He couldn't manage to sit, so he continued to prop himself from one elbow to the other. I sat my bag down on the ground. "Can I help?" I asked. "Oh, it happens all the time," he said. "My chair doesn't work so good in the rain. I'm saving for a new one. It's lighter and it goes faster." "You look familiar." "We've met outside the coffee shop. Oh, yes, you read a lot." I blushed. I'm a student. I've always been self-conscious about my reading, as if it betrays that I've stayed home for an embarrassing chunk of my life. "You must be a good one," he said. "I'm okay." There was a pause between us, and the rain picked up. "Can I help you get back in your chair?" I asked. "Oh, no," he said. "I'll be just fine. I live right over there with my mother. I'll get up eventually. I just need a little time." "Can I call her for you?" I asked. No, she's still at work. She'll be home in an hour." "Well, maybe I can just turn the chair upright," I said. "Ha, like to see you try." The chair was behind him, and somehow I managed to turn it right side up, but it wasn't easy. I'm not sure how I did it, and I don't think I could do it again. After I sat down beside him to catch my breath, I was already wet, so I took off the hood of my raincoat. "You are stronger than you look," he said. We both laughed. "Do you want to try to get back in the chair?" I asked. "Well, it looks like you're some kind of weightlifter, so yeah, let's try." I hooked my arms underneath his shoulders, and he pulled up on the wheelchair. On 3, we both lifted, but the weight of his legs was too much. We fell back into the dirt. He was about 6 feet and over 300 pounds, with everything from his waist down tethering him to the ground. I couldn't lift him, not even a little. I wrapped my arms as far as I could around him as he pulled up on the wheelchair, but the few inches he got off the ground were from his own effort. While we were struggling and sort of hugging like that, he asked me what I did. "I'm a student," I repeated. "But what do you study?" I was a women, gender, and sexuality studies major, but the last time I had said that to a man, he replied, "Yeah, me too," with a horrible wink. "I study theater. I'm an actress," I said. "Oh, yeah? Yeah, I could see that. You're real pretty. I bet you're a good actress." "I'm okay," I said again. "Are you in anything right now?" We lived again, and from behind me, I heard a gruff, "Hey!" We fell, and I turned to see a white pickup truck. The driver gave us the up and down and said to me, "You all right?" I looked around like maybe there was someone else in trouble. Then I realized what the truck driver must have seen, a tiny white girl struggling beneath the weight of a large Black man on a side street in St. Louis. "I'm fine," I said. "We were just trying to get him back in his chair." The man's brow unfurrowed, and suddenly he saw the electric wheelchair as if it hadn't been there before. He parked his pickup in the middle of the street and climbed down to help. We tried to lift the man with just two of us a few times, but still couldn't manage to set him in the chair. Because the man was so tall, the seat of the wheelchair was high off the ground. And because of the rain, the chair had short-circuited and the seat wouldn't lower. "Wait here," the man with the truck said. "I'm working construction a block away. I'll get my guys." He took off running down the alley, leaving his truck parked in the middle of the street. I sat down to wait beside the man whose name I didn't know. The rain picked up, and the dirt around us started turning to mud. "You can go," the man said. "It's so nice of you to wait, but I'll be all right. It'll come back on the chair. It always does." My heart was pounding from trying to lift the man. I looked at him now, sitting propped against his chair, and couldn't find the words. I thought about unzipping my jacket, peeling off my high-necked shirt, and showing him my chest, pointing to each and every scar, hoping this might act as our common language. Here, I would say, was a suction tube that stayed in for 3 days. Here is where they do biopsies every 6 months now by taking little pieces of the heart out through my neck. Here is where my muscles were cut when I was 4 years old for a repair that didn't work. I wanted to explain to him that I wasn't good at much, but I was good at waiting. How I had waited nearly 2 years for a heart, and a year ago, I had come so close to death that sometimes I worry the smell of it lingers on my body, and maybe that's the reason I buy so many clothes and creams. So when I said, "I'm happy to sit here with you," I meant it with all of my heart. The second excerpt is from "The Condition of My Transplanted Heart," is one of remembering. This was an exercise that she wrote at Iowa with one of her beloved mentors, Linda Bolton. And it's a reference to the condition of the Black body as one of mourning by Claudia Rankine from 2015, a well-known essay. The condition of my transplanted heart is one of remembering. The heart came from somewhere in the Midwest by plane to St. Louis Children's Hospital during Game 5 of the 2006 World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Detroit Tigers. My mother heard cheers as the surgeon stepped off the elevator with the cooler containing the organ. She took a picture of the surgeon and the cooler in the same moment that Adam Wainwright threw the final pitch, a strike, to Brandon Inge, I don't know how to pronounce that name actually, and the Cardinals became champions. In the picture, the surgeon is smiling. The cooler containing the organ is navy blue. The surgeon holds it with one hand. Years after the transplant, I find the photo on my mother's phone while trying to help her clear space for more memory. She asked me to leave it there because she sometimes likes to look at it. I zoom in on the cooler. It is the closest I've ever come to seeing the heart now inside my chest, or a picture of the donor. My own heart I've seen. After it was taken out, I asked if I could bring it home with me. It was an unusual request, one the hospital had never fulfilled before. My cardiologist asked if it was a Jewish thing. My parents are rabbis and they both said, no, it's not a Jewish thing to take your organs home with you. All I could say was that I wanted it. It had been mine, and I didn't want it to be thrown away. They released it to me in an urn through a funeral parlor as my own remains. I suppose it does remain in a way as evidence of that great event. I now have two hearts in my possession, one inside and one out in an urn. The process of getting my heart released took a few weeks. I went to the hospital for a checkup around Thanksgiving, and my doctor presented me with a square wooden box. It was the cheapest urn, my mother said. My family doesn't usually do much for Thanksgiving. Gratitude was overwhelming. So we made about 7 kinds of pie and then opened the box to view the heart. Inside there was a white, round, tall plastic container. Inside that container, my heart. We all wore plastic gloves. We put newspaper down on the table in case the liquid the heart was preserved in dripped. I removed my heart and held it in 2 hands because it was large, pale yellow, and deformed, but it hardly dripped. We passed it around and said thanks. Thanks to my old heart for doing all it could. Thanks to the new heart for being so good. Thanks to each other for coming home. I thought about the donor's family. It overwhelmed me to think that somewhere not so far away, there was someone young like me, small like me, with O positive blood like mine, missing from a table. My family's gratitude, our joy, comes in large part from another family's grief. It's not a direct correlation nor a direct result. I did not cause that death, but I did wait for it to come for a long time. And when it did, I was grateful. But what would that make the condition of my transplanted heart? Not quite grieving, not quite gratitude. What can I call the crawl space in between? When you're put on a transplant list as a child, before the age of 18, as I did, you're required to go through a psychological evaluation. Sometimes kids lose themselves in their transplants and donors. They miss their illness because it made them special. Sometimes donors can become a way of avoiding the overwhelming possibilities and responsibilities that come with wellness. Kids say they are living the life their donors left behind. I've struggled with what my obligations are to the donor as well. It's a kind of self-preservation, I think, that I have not yet asked to know who the donor was. I might someday, but lately I think more about the space of grief in the transplant process. If it's possible to inhabit grief and gratitude at the same time, to respect the heart, the gift of it, and also believe it can never truly be earned or deserved. In the Talmud, it says that Shimon Bar Yochai, the paradigm for Jewish mystical teachers and miracle workers, lived with, quote, one eye laughing and one eye crying. On the 10-year anniversary of the transplant, I go walking in the cemetery near my home in Iowa City. I make my way to the bodies donated to Science Garden. There's a podium, but nowhere to sit. I stand with an open notebook, ready to speak. I go up and down on the balls of my feet. I don't pray often, and when pressed, I forget the words. Up, down. My father used to say that this motion, davening, is how angels pray, standing on their toes because their souls, S-O-L-E-S, are S-O-U-L-S/S-O-L-E-S, are hot with holiness. But it's October, and I'm cold, standing in mist so fine that I can only see it when it lands on the pages of my open notebook. I press a hand to my chest. I search through my coat, the layers of shirts for the heartbeat. How does it begin? I can't remember, so I walk in circles until my cheeks flush, and I feel ready to take death scans. I whisper that I've been well, and then all the ways I'm worried my life won't go right, all the ways I have embraced wellness. I might not be able to write a book. I might never find a partner. I might never have children. I might never get a haircut I like. Death kisses me slow, familiar, and I go quiet. I remember all the things I could not do before. And suddenly the movement of my legs, the hunger in my stomach, the cold October morning, and my ability to stay warm are enough. We walk on, and I recite the mourner's Kaddish for the donor and the family for whom 10 years ago they lost some light. I sit beside death all morning, tracing the scar that runs up and down my chest. 10 years went so quickly, I say. I think of that picture my mother has in her phone of the cooler containing the heart. She told me she keeps it just to remember the moment. Maybe that's what the crawl space is, between grief and gratitude, remembrance or memory. Maybe that is the condition of my transplanted heart, one of remembering. And I know we're at 5:30. I just want to check in. Should I read the last one, which is a 10-minute read, or should we go to questions more? What do you think? Read? Yeah. Okay, the third is thank God for the nights that go right. This is an excerpt from one of the essays that that it's the last essay in the book. And she was working on it right before she moved to Iowa and New York. And it was one of the ones that was in like many, many versions. And there were passages here, passages there. So it came together in kind of one beautiful piece. Thank God for the nights that go right. I stood next to a man at a bar with a $14 beer in one hand, my coat in the other, and no good way to grab my pills at 10 p.m. I'd spent a lot of nights at bars that week, and I'd missed my 10 p.m. deadline more than once. It's the easiest thing, the only thing I have to do really to stay alive. Just take the pills at the same time every morning and every night in order to have the perfect amount of medicine in my system so that my body doesn't suddenly wake up and say, fuck this heart, rip it up, it doesn't belong. I didn't know much about the man, or rather, I knew a few small things and one large thing. We'd both had heart transplants. It's not really bar talk. He was a friend of my friend Joey. Joey was the friend I called first when we knew the heart was coming, the friend who sat on my bed as I packed my bag for the hospital, the friend who got me through, the best friend. She was part of a house improv team at the Upright Citizens Brigade with the man. They practiced and performed every week. Joey called me late one night when she was walking home from rehearsal after he told her that he had a heart transplant. She talks fast when she's excited. He's 14 years out, she said. 14. Before the transplant, doctors told me a new heart would last for 10 good years. Not just 10 years, but 10 good years. After that, the kidneys might start to fail from one kind of immunosuppressant. You might get skin cancer from another, or the arteries might start to harden for reasons they can't quite explain. I was at 7 and doing, as one doctor put it, beautifully. I'd had no rejection, no hardening of the arteries, no signs of decline in any other organ. There are reasons for all these things, better medicines, a good diet, etc., but I am more comfortable calling it luck. I went to their next improv show alone. After I found Joey at the bar, she asked if I wanted her to introduce me to the man with 14 years, if I was sure. I thanked her for asking. It's nice to have a friend who holds my secrets like they are her secrets too. I shook his hand, and one of the other members of the improv team standing nearby said, "Hey, you guys are heart twins." Not really, I thought, because that's not a thing, thank God. We stepped over to the bar together to get drinks and talked about this largeness between us. I ordered a fork slap. We talked about what meds we were each on and what doctors we saw in the city. We'd seen the same cardiologist at one time, but he'd switched. He didn't get many checkups anymore, just an annual, almost like any other red-blooded American. Me too, sort of, I said. I explained that I had gone to India recently, so they'd made me get every shot imaginable and then come by for a few checkups after the trip. I think we cheersed to that. He'd had his transplant in Maryland during college. Mine was during college too, I said, in St. Louis. Joey was there. He asked why I needed it. I told him I was in heart failure from the time I was 12, and that I had waited for the heart for nearly 2 years. His story was different. He'd never had any issues growing up, but he got sick in college, an infection or something, and needed a transplant immediately. He waited for less than 2 weeks. You're fast, I'm slow, I thought. Your trauma must be so different from mine. There were long, awkward pauses during our conversation at the bar when I should have been asking him more questions. Him at 14 years, nice and willing to answer. But I couldn't even make proper eye contact with him. The questions I still have, the ones about death and donors and borrowed time, seemed out of place standing at the bar, fork slap in one hand and heart in the other. So I asked instead what he was up to now. He worked in healthcare. To give back, he said. I put my coat between my knees and checked the time on my phone, 10:35 p.m. I mentally kicked myself around for earlier and dug in my bag for my medicine. I took it fast with a swig of beer, and the man told me he took his pills at 9 and 9. He said something about my looking good, something along the lines of being surprised when Joey told him I'd had a transplant. I didn't know what to say. I should. It's something I've heard a lot in the years since I've received the heart. that I am unpatient-like, that you cannot tell with my clothes on the freakishness of my distinctly modern body, as if illness should be uglier, more grotesque. I should have said that I too was surprised by his wellness, his unfreakishness. I was afraid, however, that he might take it as flirting. Joey came over. I'm not sure if it was by luck or because she noticed the man and I weren't really talking anymore. She said she had to run to another show. I told her I'd walk with her to the subway. I said goodbye and nice to meet you to Mr. 14 years. While we were walking to the train, I apologized to Joey. I told her I was weird and awkward with her friend. I kind of lost it when he said he worked in healthcare. I said, why? She asked. I don't know. He's just so together. He was probably like, that girl is covered in trauma. I don't think people think like that, Joey said. I'm sure it was weird for him too. Are you okay? I think so. I just feel shitty, like a shit person, a person made of shit. She gave me a hug, patted me on my head like she sometimes does, and told me to give myself a break. We boarded the F train going in opposite directions, and I thought about my 7 years since the transplant. I'm starting to trust that I might live a while longer than expected, 14 years beyond in good health. What will I do with all that time? How will I ever be worthy of it? There were delays on the F train, and I had to get off and transfer to the C. I don't usually take the C train, but that night I had no choice. As I waited on the platform, I tried to think of all the ways I could be better. I could go to the gym more. I could go to the gym at all. I could volunteer again at a hospital the way I used to in high school. But I hated it then, and I only did it as a way to spend time with a boy I had a crush on. He wanted to volunteer at Children's Hospital, so I did too, even though I spent plenty of time there already. As a patient, I hated volunteers, especially the woman and her Dalmatian who used to go from room to room, dressed the same, asking if you needed a little love and remarking to me that a smile was really my best medicine. My mother would kindly usher her out of the room or lie and say I was allergic to dogs. I love dogs, which is why I think putting green glitter eyeshadow and tutus on them is cruel. You should tell her she can't come in because she's terrible, I would say, and my mother would laugh. Before the transplant, my parents took me to see an abbot. They're both rabbis, and my mother had a habit of taking me to every healer who rolled through town while I was growing up. Mostly they didn't work, but sometimes we had miracles. The abbot was not a healer, though, my parents said. He was just a holy man. We sat in his office, my mother, father, and I. He asked me if I had any questions for him or for God. I was tired. I had been waiting a year already, and I was declining in health and sanity. I asked the abbot if it was okay not to know if I wanted the heart to come. I asked him if it was okay to sometimes smoke cigarettes in Vermont with my boyfriend, if I couldn't do that anymore with the new heart when the new heart came because it wouldn't be mine to destroy the way this one was. I asked him if it was okay that I had thought about it a great deal, and I did not want to know the donor or think of him every day because I liked the person I was and I didn't want to risk losing myself to an organ. I asked him how I could deserve the heart better. I did not cry. My parents were quiet. The abbot was soft-spoken. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and had white hair. He stayed still when he spoke, occasionally raising his hand to point to nothing in particular. I think, he said, that these are good questions. It's good to ask questions. But now that you've asked, he raised his hand, you can rest. You need a new heart. You'll get a new heart. And the hardest part, God willing, will be your waiting. So perhaps you give up. Give it all up to God. The words we use to describe the sick, how we praise those who put on a brave face, how I received extra stickers and lollipops when I did not cry as a child, how we call people who don't complain strong and often compare illness to illness and then say it can always be worse. We demand gratitude. The abbot offered me a way out of that narrative, a silver branch to lift me out of the thinking that things always worse, a break from a crushing kind of gratitude. Give up. I imagined myself sinking to the bottom of a great body of water, not swimming and not being able to breathe until I reached the bottom. The night before the call came, I sat in the passenger seat of Joey's green minivan, a defibrillator vest strapped to my chest and an IV in my arm. I cried so hard, I started to gag. I want it so bad, I said, I give up. She repeated it was coming over and over again as she rubbed the part of my back not taken up by the vest. My heart was beating very fast and there was a beeping from inside my bag, a warning that the vest would shock me in 15 seconds if I did not press the right button on the battery pack because an arrhythmia might be pending. I dug around in my bag and could not find the battery. Adina, don't be funny. Adina, please find the fucking battery. I'm trying, I laughed. I found it with a few seconds to spare and the pack was quiet once again. I turned to Joey and apologized for scaring her. When the surgeons removed my old heart, they said I was lucky my liver wasn't failing. I was lucky to be alive. I couldn't have waited any longer. Thank you, I said to everyone in the hospital that week I recovered. Thank you, thank you, thank you, compulsively like a tick, until thank you was the only sound I made in exhalation before sleep. It was nearly midnight when I stepped off the C train and started walking down the platform towards the Washington Avenue exit. And there he was, the man from the bar, my heart twin. He was on the platform heading toward the opposite exit and hadn't seen me. We'd been on the same train in different cars. I paused and recognized my choice. I could say something or not. Jesse, I yelled. Hey, Jesse. He turned around and we walked back toward each other. We met in the middle and I said, I'm sorry for being so weird at the bar. Me too, he said. It's just that it's not something I talk about in bars or otherwise. It's not something I usually share with people. Me neither, he said. But you should know it delighted me and Joey to hear 14 years. We laughed a little and hugged and said maybe we'd get coffee sometime and do it right. Then we parted ways. Above ground, I had missed calls from my dad and my mom. Now that I live in New York, we usually talk while I'm walking somewhere. I can still hear the delight in their voices when they ask, what are you doing? And I reply that I'm walking. I called my dad because he was more likely to be awake. He asked me where I was, and I told him the whole story of the night, of the boy with 14 years, of Joey, of the train delays, and the subway stop I never go to. At the end, I said, sometimes the universe just shouts, I got you, you know, and you feel right. Yeah, he said, that's like God.
Thank you so much. So beautiful, so beautiful. Just so these phrases are in my head, this remarkable wit and gentle, precise turns of humor in these moments, just gorgeous. While I'm asking a couple of questions, if people want to put questions into the chat, please please do. Yeah. So it's so clear that, Adina was a writer, but I'm wondering, sort of how you might talk a little bit about the role of writing in her life, vis-a-vis writing about something other than her illness, vis-a-vis writing about her illness and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, she was always writing and reading. She was, they were a deep, deep part of her and part of one whole, I would say. Like writing to me seemed like a friend or a companion for her. She kept like years and years of these, the medium-sized, red, thin, moleskin notebooks, like all organized in one place. And she endearingly called them Little Red. And she wrote drafts of everything in those notebooks. So she would have like complete essays, and then she'd also have, like they're beautiful to look at now. Like they're full of, essays or scenes she was working out, or just fragments of ideas she was working through, or, difficult, memories that she was working on to think, feel, work through, to witness, to honor, to offer something. I think for her, writing was really like the way another way that she gave. That's who she was. That's that was part of people, the performative part of her. She was very, very funny and entertaining to anybody she met. And that was a way of giving, it was a way of being fully with and attentive to and kind. Yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind. She was always also, I think, coming more and more into herself as a thinker, and really interested in, with the writing about illness, she was very interested in the ill body and her own transplanted body as bodies of difference, and finding the right language to write about those experiences. And then I think writing about anything, she wrote somewhere else, not in the book, that she writes towards moments of light and undoing, so that to me says, I love that phrase. And she wrote into what she called crawl spaces. That was in the second piece I read, the moments of transformation or the in-betweens. She loved that image of one eye laughing and one eye crying.
I think that part of the surprise of the text is always that often when people write about such difficult things, there's a kind of solemnity and just the, the surprises of her, personality just exploding out of the, so wonderful. Do you want to say a word or two about, I think you spoke at the beginning about the wonderful process of pulling pieces together and going through the drafts and so forth. And I know it was really a collaborative process. I don't know, to me, that's, it also feels like it was kind of grief work and all these things. And just wondering if you'd like to say anything about that process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, where do I begin? I mean, it was so helpful to have a circle of people it was like an anchor, in terms of the grief work. It was like Adina's teacher, who I mentioned at the beginning of, the condition of my transplanted heart is one of remembering. Linda came to see us after Adina died, and she said, she told me not to be afraid. She said, you shared a voice with her. Of course, I told her how shattered everything felt for me. I didn't feel like I was ever gonna, know how to exist. And she had been through unspeakable losses of her own. And she said what she wished she had been told is, don't be afraid to go into the darkness. Don't be afraid of it. Don't run away from it. And that really helped me. And then she read us this beautiful Joy Harjo poem that ends in beauty, the poem Eagle. I just got fuzzy, I don't know why, in the camera, but anyway, so that, I think that's what anchored me in creating like a physical manuscript or a physical book, was this notion of doing something for her in beauty, something she would have liked. And then the collaboration was really easy because I had Hannah. I mean, she's such a skilled editor that it was a lot of like, what did Adina mean by this? Or how about this passage here? Does this sound like her? How does this read? And a lot of that kind of back and forth. And what about this order, right, of essays? And then in the end, we, the first iteration was I had even put together, I had included some fragments from her notebooks, and we had that as sort of ephemera that could have potentially gone into the book, but we decided it didn't need the ephemera, that they could be, there, we have them.
Yeah. I wanted to ask also, I mean, I just want to mention that you wrote as your capstone in the narrative medicine program an unforgettable memoir about growing up and living your life in relation to her. And I think about what you just described as kind of spending time with her, with others, through the writing, which seems so wonderful. But I'm curious about, if there was a special relationship that she had with any of her clinicians, any of the doctors or others that she, spent so much of her life with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the person who stands out most to me would be her pediatric cardiologist, Charlie Cantor, who was her doctor. And I could see like my mom's face nodding, but he was her doctor for her whole childhood, right, since the beginning. And he was not known for his bedside manner, I'll just say it that way. Like he was not known, as the most warm, expressive kind of doctor. But he was very brilliant. And the two of them had the funniest, like most loving relationship where she would make him laugh and he would make her laugh, and it was very sweet and very caring. And the years of heart failure and just trying to decide when to list, whether to list at all, like it was such a scary, heavy time of waiting, and which she writes about. And she told this story, and she was writing about this too, that she was getting so sick, and her life was getting so limited, that he said to her, he quoted When Harry Met Sally, he said, when you know what you want for the rest of your life, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. And that helped her, and it helped everyone. It helped all of us. It sort of opened something up in a different way. And that's something that I think about a lot, just that it was just that simple. And then a second memorable moment, which I know I told you a fragment of, it was like a spark of a memory, but it's funny that when I ran it by my mom, I didn't remember that Charlie Cantor was also part of this story. So there was like a night where something felt wrong to Adina, like after the transplant. She was in college, I think. And I was with her. We ended up in the ER to check something. And she had been out the night before, and she was covered in glitter and like probably dressed like a flamboyant clown of some kind. And, she just like had a real style, and like she felt very judged by everyone. Charlie Cantor happened to be the attending. So he was like, oh, she was probably drank too much, like give her fluids, nothing's wrong. And then there was judgment from everyone else of like, what is she doing? What is this transplant, person, like, what is this person who had a heart transplant doing, going out and covered in glitter? And I remember her turning to me and going, Sarika, can you please narrative medicine this? Because she knew something was wrong and nobody was listening to her. And my mom reminded me that whatever I did, whatever conversation we had in that moment, like really helped open up space to hear what was actually going on with her body and give it the attention it needed.
Oh, love that story. There's one question here. It's interesting to me. I think people just feel so satisfied by what you read that they don't have questions for you. But Liz Storm asks about the balance of humor in the, how did you kind of make decisions? Did you ever feel like, wait, that's maybe too funny here? Should I maybe take that? How did humor figure in the editing of, the putting together of pieces?
Yeah, I mean, there was never a question of taking anything out. Really, humor was such a big part of her and her writing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that better. Just that it's so central in my view of what she was up to as a writer.
Yeah, I can.
Just attentive to, humor is a way of being attentive, I think. And she was masterful at that in so many ways.
Yeah, that gorgeous image of playing her chest like an accordion and finding the right notes to have the scar disappear. I mean, that is unforgettable, beautiful moment. I mean, there's so many, but that one really grabs me over and over. Yeah. Well, almost, we're just at the, close to the end of time. I mean, the end of this moment of time, not the time, unfortunately. But I wonder if there's anything else that, I don't want to throw another question at you for the last second, but wonder if there's anything else that you would like to share, memory, a moment.
No, I just thank you for having me. And but the book was just longlisted for a big prize.
No surprise.
I forget the name of the prize now. It's like it's some big literary prize from England.
Wonderful. Wow. The
I don't
wind.
know why I got fuzzy. Something happened to my internet. I'm sorry.
It's kind of great, actually. You look a little like a painting there.
I think I forgot to switch to this network, but
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Sarika. I'm so grateful that you produced this with Hannah Tinti, and I know everyone who is here just loved this. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and there'll be a recording that you'll receive, and we hope to see you all next time for our next rounds, which will resume after the holiday break. And please stay tuned, check our website for updates about what's coming. And thank you everyone, and thank you, Sarika. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.